Welcome to the Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group's UCMC podcast, where our analysts convene to delve into the realms of Russian disinformation, propaganda, and the influence of hybrid warfare in 2024. And in this episode, we'll discuss Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba's visit to China, as well as the disinformation that has emerged as a result of this visit. But before we do, let me introduce you to my colleagues, the usuals for this podcast, Nastya, Anton, and Volodymyr, the analysts of the Hybrid Warfare Group. So, just as a reminder, on July the 24th, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. And the meeting between the two ministers followed up discussions between Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, and the Chinese president after months of discussion. The main topic of discussion was the search for ways to stop Russia's aggression in Ukraine and for China's potential role in achieving lasting and just peace. Let's start today with Volodymyr. Volodymyr, let me know, what have you been seeing in Russian propaganda channels and media as an event of post-meeting in China?
Thanks, Matt. So the main purpose for Russian propaganda was to undermine Ukrainian attempts to reach any agreements or any deal with China. For the Kremlin, it was quite a critical momentum, as well as for other players, because we are on the eve of elections in the United States. And from my perspective, that poses different challengers, but also it formed the main frame for diplomacy attempts, because we received many messages even from our Western partners and friends, like recently a statement by the President of the Czech Republic, Mr. Pavel, who mentioned that there is no proposal to launch the second peace summit without any participation of China and Russia. So that means that for Kyiv, it is time for framing this second peace summit. So my vision of the visit of Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs to China, there are several versions of the reason why Ukrainian Foreign Minister met with his counterpart from China. So the first reason may be that China tries to pressure on Kyiv, and that means that Beijing summoned the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs to the so-called corporate to convey its ultimatum about the necessity to fulfill so-called Sino-Brazilian plan. That means that China would like to portray itself as a leader of so-called Global South, and on the eve of presidential elections, it is very important for China to keep a control over the diplomatic efforts, because we are on the eve of presidential elections in United States, and nobody knows so-called Trump plan about dealing with the Russia-Ukraine war. And that means that also Beijing may try to reach some agreements with Kyiv before Trump may deal with Moscow. And another version is that at the same time, Beijing is trying to make a pressure on Moscow, given that recent visit of President Putin to Pyongyang may create some dissatisfaction in Beijing, because there were some agreements between Pyongyang and Moscow regarding export of some military and missile technologies from Russia to North Korea, which China perceives as its satellite. But anyway, I think that is not a very possible scenario, because China obtained a large amount of toolkit to send such a message of dissatisfaction to the Moscow, with the means of lifting supplies of technologies which Russia is dependent on in terms of military technical complex. So there is no proposal to China to send such messages publicly and calling up to the Ukrainian representatives. So the most possible scenarios for me is attempt for Beijing to take an advantage of Ukraine's moment of uncertainty and diplomatic weakness on the eve of the United States elections, since Ukraine is forced to declare its readiness to negotiate with Russia, and that is obviously the shift in official position of Kyiv since from the autumn of 2022, Ukraine authorities forbid any negotiations with Putin personally. But now we witnessed several statements by President Zelenskyy that we should negotiate with anyone who have a real control over the situation in Russia. We do not have any other leverages to go to negotiations with other forces in Russia except Putin. So that means that there are the diplomatic track is very active nowadays. But anyway, I think that until we will know who will lead the next administration of United States, until that time there is no chances for launching any diplomatic process that may lead to any concrete results in terms of freezing the war or even reaching a peaceful agreement.
One quick question for you, Volodymyr, then, concerning, obviously, you're taking more the side of Ukraine's political diplomacy with China in this analysis. Was it successful, in your opinion?
We do not have much marks on how we may assume about success, whether this visit was successful or not. It will take us a time to investigate on the dynamics of supplies of Chinese technologies into the military-industrial complex of Russia. So the main issue for Ukraine is for today is not only diplomatic, but also a restriction for supplies which fuel Russian military production. And if we will witness that Russians will face with some restrictions in producing missiles, we may conclude on the success of this visit. And also another point is that it is very important for Ukrainian authority to launch relations between our leadership. And in case Zelenskyy will meet with President Xi on some kind of summits or even make a state visit to China, that will also mark whether visit of Ukrainian foreign minister to China was successful or not.
Thank you, Volodymyr. So yeah, exactly. We need some time to see what the results will be, but as a diplomatic step, it was definitely the correct thing to do from Ukraine's side. Okay, let's go to Nastya. Nastya, I know you're going to give us kind of a more generalized analysis of what Russian media and state media has been saying about this visit. What can you give us?
Thank you, Matt. I will briefly review how Russian propaganda responded to Mr. Kuleba's visit to China and his statements. And in fact, if I had to describe it in one word, it would be careful. Since Kuleba stated in China that Ukraine is ready for negotiations, and negotiations are now the main theme that the Kremlin tries to play in its rhetoric regarding the Ukraine-Russia war. Before the statement about the readiness for negotiations, the propagandists' rhetoric was much harsher. They said that Ukrainian foreign minister went to China to beg Xi to accept Ukraine's peace plan. However, when it's turned out that Kuleba has had a clear and well throughout diplomacy in his hands, starting with Peskov, who declared that Russia is waiting for clarifications, the harshness of the Kremlin words began to decrease. In China, Kuleba stated that Ukraine hopes to strengthen mutual political trust between the states. And before Peskov's statement, the classic Kremlin narratives about the drug addict Zelenskyy were voiced. The most odious propagandist called the state of Ukraine a prostitute, saying it would do anything to get support. There were also claims that Ukraine was deceiving the US by leading towards China, and that all of the actions of the Ukrainian government were influenced by internal political games of Biden, Harris, Trump, in short, anything and everything. And now, after Kuleba has left China, Russian propaganda is returning to the rhetoric that a fair peace with Ukraine is impossible without denazification. In other words, they have nothing new to say in response, so they revert to their oldest narratives, which have long been tiresome and ineffective.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Nastya. Absolutely. It's one of those things which are returning back to old narratives because there's not really much else to say about it. It was a successful in terms of diplomacy visit, and all they can do is try to discredit. And saying that, I know, Anton, you're going to speak a little bit more about the discreditation that they were trying to make on Kuleba as well. We know that's one of Russian propaganda's favorite thing to do, starting with, as Nastya said, Zelenskyy. But what was more specific on Kuleba? What have you been seeing?
Okay, thank you, Matt. Today I want to speak a bit not about Kuleba itself, but about Ukrainian democracy in altogether. So Russian state media has portrayed this diplomatic visit as a sign that a sign of Ukraine's desperation and so-called isolation, emphasizing the really strained relations between Kyiv and Beijing, by framing Kuleba's visit as an attempt to seek support from China or something else because of upcoming presidential election in the United States, about what said Volodymyr. So this narrative is designed to undermine Ukraine's international standing and portrays the government and the minister itself as a weak and very dependent on international coalitions such as European Union, United States, and else. Additionally, Russian propaganda has sought to highlight any potential points of contention between China and Ukraine by emphasizing these differences. Russian media aims to cast doubt on the effectiveness and sincerity of Ukraine's diplomatic efforts. They said that this visit was only about to ask China to stop support directly or indirectly Russia. Moreover, Russian propaganda often used Kuleba's visit with it and said that Kuleba's visit was needed to strengthen ties with Beijing, suggesting a growing rift between China and Ukraine because of a lot of diplomatic issues that only Russian propaganda can see. These achievements, Russians seeks any possibility to diminish Ukraine's diplomatic achievements and reinforce the idea that Russia holds a much stronger position on the Asia stage. And to maximize the effect of this message, Russian propagandists constantly stated that Kuleba is really not welcomed in China, especially after his words that no one can bring Ukraine to the negotiation table. And we know that China is very careful with such statements because of their concern about peace Europe region. So the main goal of the Russian information campaign around this visit is to discredit Ukrainian diplomatic corpus in any possible way, and they use.
Thank you very much, Anton, and thank you very much, guys, for your short and succinct analysis today. It is very useful for our listeners to obviously keep in touch with the events and know exactly what has happened after these important for Ukraine and for the world events. Okay, until next time.